technical delays as we got going today, but I'm here now. Bear with me. I'm just trying to make sure everything is working on the other end as we go here so I can see your comments. Oh, it does not want to rotate. Hold on a second. Nope, not that way. Hold on. Hold on. Bear with me, folks, if you're here. If you are here, it is not showing up the way I want it to, so we are going to improvise because that's what we're all about, right? Is we improvise. So hold on a second. I will change the way my tripod is, and we'll go this way. And then we're set. Here we go. Hi. That's working better. So there's a few of you on here. Apologies for that delay. This is I don't think it's my first time doing live on YouTube, but since I've really started doing more on my YouTube channel, it is. And so I'm trying to do a little bit more for you. I have often done Instagram lives, and we use the vertical format in Instagram. And so I was hoping to do horizontal today, but I think I did something wrong when I set it up. So, that's how it goes. We do have the chat open. I have a second screen over here so that I can see the chat. So if you're on and you want to say hello, hi, put yourself in the chat, tell us where you're joining us from, and all of that. So let's get to it. Who am I? I am Cheryl Arkeson. I am your host for Quilters Playcation. I am also your main instigator for some playtime with quilting, a lot of improv work. I am a mother. I am a teacher. I am a business owner outside of quilting. I live here, and I'm also a dog mom. Let's not forget that really important part. He's not here with me today. He sometimes is. Yeah, so I am all of those things. And what I am most importantly here for today is you. I wanted to come today and celebrate as the season is getting very busy. Hello, Leva 1994. Good to see you. I am saying hello. Joining from Sacramento, California. That's fantastic. Yeah, please, everybody put yourselves in the chat that you're here. If you're watching live, hello. You can also put questions in the chat. I will keep an eye on it. So if you see me looking over there, that's what I'm doing. Jennifer, thank you, Jennifer at Violin 8085. We know now it's Jennifer. Hopefully I will remember that as we go. I'm sometimes not very good with names. But yeah, so when you see me looking over there, that's just me looking at the chat because I might not see it on the smaller screen. Yeah, so I wanted to come give you a gift. And it is a literal gift. We are making a quilted gift. I love doing these improv tutorials. I love bringing myself to you and inviting you to play with me. That is my goal as a teacher. That is my goal as a quilter, is to play as often as possible. And I'm thrilled to always be passing on that message. So as I said, that's what we're here for today. I have been doing these lives for a few years now, mostly on Instagram, although you can find a few years worth here on YouTube as well. But I have done the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sew Along since, let's see, we didn't do it this year, but we did last year, 2024. It was one block for 49 weeks that we did this. In 2023, we did one a month for 10 months. In 2022, we did one a week for 52 weeks. So there is a big history of improv block tutorials from me, and you could make a million samplers from all of the different blocks. And this is going to be one that we add to the list. We're going to do a present, and we're going to do a present with lots of bows because it's pretty easy to do a box. But it's the bows that are the really fun part when we're doing these presents. So welcome to everybody joining, popping in. Lovely to see you. Again, use the chat as you feel like it. I will look for questions in there. You can ask me quilting questions. You can ask technique questions about what we're doing today. You can ask me inspiration questions, things you might want to know about me. Let's keep it clean, but lots of different stuff. Hoping for guy gift ideas. Ooh, I'm not sure I have that. My husband doesn't buy clothes for himself, so we generally buy him clothes because we have a bit, he'd love tools, but we don't buy that. So yes, we got people joining from Burlington, Wisconsin, Edmonton, my hometown. Actually St. Albert, but nobody's ever heard of it unless they know Edmonton. So that is where I am from. So you know where to find me, CherylArkeson.com or quiltersplacation.com. You can check out more on the YouTube channel here or on my Instagram, which is at Cheryl Arkeson, at Cheryl_Arkeson. And that's where you can find me. But today I am here. So let's get to this. The first thing we want to talk about is fabric selection. When we do this, I had someone message me or ask me yesterday, how much fabric do we need if we want to make the block? I can't really give you that answer definitively until we start making something, because it really depends on how big of a block that you want to make or how small of a block you want to make. I do recommend hitting up your scraps or some leftovers. Usually whenever I'm trying a new technique, I may take fabric that I don't love as much. So I tend to experiment with something that I'm not necessarily tied to per se. So if that's what floats your boat here, then that's what we're going to do. If you have some specific Christmas fabrics or Hanukkah fabrics in mind, or maybe it's for a birthday present. So we can go from there. So I made my sample block with, again, fabrics I hadn't really kind of thought about, but now I'm thinking about what I might do with these. And so I went into the stash and I picked some fabrics. So I've got this bundle here. I don't have a lot of Christmassy fabrics. We do celebrate Christmas in our house. But a few years back, I had bought a bundle of Allison Glass Christmas stuff, and I used most of it for another quilt. But I found a couple of fat quarters today. So that kind of inspired the color scheme that I'm going with. So it was these two fabrics, a geometric, and then this one with the little people on it. There's a really pretty angel there. So that kind of inspired where I was going to go with these. So I just kind of went through the stash. I liked the idea of adding polka dots into it. So I added this one, which has been in my stash forever. Haven't used it. This, which is a scrap from something else. So it was a nice polka dot. Those two kind of really go nicely together, but there is pink in here. So in different shades. So that's why I thought I could bring both pinks in. And then I also brought in another pink, this really kind of soft pink with little stars. It almost looks like could be, you know, glitter on the snow. So that idea. I brought in a blue as well. This is not your conventional Christmas kind of stuff. But I brought in this blue because this polka dot had some blue on it. And I thought it would be kind of nice. And then when I went in the green bin to see if I could coordinate with this little bit here, which is kind of a minty aqua sort of color, I remembered that I had this scrap, which is actually another Christmas fabric. It was washi tape fabric, so it was kind of fun. I used it on the back of another quilt. So I have this odd piece left. And then I found this kind of in that minty color as well. And I'm adding that in. So those are the fabrics that I'm using for the presents. So these are effectively the wrapping paper of the quilt. And then for the bows, I wanted to have really strong contrast, because that's actually the key in this block, is that your ribbon and your bows have quite strong contrast with your wrapping paper fabric, right? So I went back into the pink bin and I picked out two very bright pinks to add to this. And so you can see all together, these pinks have quite a bit of contrast with the rest of everything going on. They have a really strong contrast in color, obviously, but they have a strong contrast for the most part in value as well. And this is something that you should probably double check as you're going along to make sure that these stand out. Are they the same value than everything? What do I mean by value? Value is the relative light or darkness of your fabrics. And the key word there is relative, because it all depends on what it's next to. Let me show you what I mean. So if I take this bow fabric, which is, I think it's another Rashida Coleman Hale, the speckle that she's got in a whole bunch of basics. If I take that and I pair it with these polka dots, we can look with our eyes and say, oh my gosh, there's great contrast, right? Really strong, dark, light here. But what if I pair it with this minty green? Pretty good. But this minty green, it's not as light as the polka dot, right? So the minty green actually has contrast. This becomes a dark compared to this light. So we really kind of have a light, a medium, and a dark here. So I could maybe do ribbon and bow this way, wrapping paper and ribbon there, or wrapping paper and ribbon there, or wrapping paper and ribbon there, right? So we have contrast in all of these. When I get this blue, you know, I grabbed it from the stash and I'm thinking it's going to make a great present. I have very strong color difference, right? We have this really bright, warm. We have actually kind of a shaded, this is a very sort of earth tone kind of blue, if that makes sense. It doesn't have a real vibrancy to it, so it's more of a shade versus a hue, whereas this is a very bright hue. And so that provides some contrast. But if I were to do my special little trick, and this is my special trick for determining value, take a picture of your fabrics in question and turn that picture into black and white. You can do it almost all tablets and phone, digital, or smartphones, I should say, or a digital camera. You can take the picture, turn it into black and white, and then all you see is value. You don't see color anymore, and you'll see if there is enough of a distinction between them. Sometimes when they're really close, it can make it so that they kind of disappear and you wouldn't see that distinction of the ribbon in it. And we want to make sure we have good contrast here. So, you know, I want to look and go, do I have good contrast with that? Again, probably similar values, but what's going to make a difference with this fabric is these lighter bits, the yellow and that sort of aqua kind of color there. And then the really strong pattern on this is going to help provide a distinction between these, even if this dark color and the pink are probably pretty similar values. I think likewise with the blue, in black and white, these probably would read fairly similar. If anything, this might read a little bit darker in black and white. I'd have to check. But because again, I have this strong line here, whereas this is just a little tiny all over pattern, I'm going to get some good contrast with that. So what is on the fabric is almost as important as the color of the fabric itself for providing contrast. If you look over my shoulder here, we've got that green washi tape fabric with the pink ribbon. Again, similar values, but that warm for the ribbon and the cool for the background plus having all of the print on the background helps create a really nice contrast there. So before you go making your gifts, double check with your digital device and just make sure you have the contrast you're going to be happy with. And you may get into making some of these blocks and realize, oh, that one's not working. I don't have the contrast. Then don't use that block. It's pretty straightforward. You're not tied to everything that you make. And that's something, if you've ever taken a class with me before, you've heard me say, pardon me, I'm going to grab some tea. If you've ever taken a class with me before, you've heard me say it, nothing you make with me today has to become something. We have the ability to just spend the time and play, and that's it. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. And that's why this is a gift for you, is we want to come on and we can play with it. So that's why we're here today. Any questions on that fabric selection? How much will you need? Again, it depends on how big you make your blocks. I started my bow section with, a strip roughly 12 and a half inches by 4 or 5. That's a good place to start. And then the present, a fat eighth is as much as you need. And then the ribbon, a couple of strips of fabric. And that's it. We can play with all of that. Yeah, exactly. Large blocks. The bigger you make them, the more you get to a quilt. I love really playing with scale. So I have made like giant, not in this particular block, but now you got me thinking, giant blocks. Like we're talking like 40 inches. And I love making teeny tiny things too. And it's fun to kind of play around. I think if I were to make a whole quilt of these present blocks, I would play around with different sizes and see what happens. Now, the thing is, we're doing improv work here. So I'm not going to tell you cut a strip exactly this size and cut a square exactly this size, because it's going to vary for everybody. And we're going to play with those scales a little bit as we go along. So go with what feels right for you. Trust yourself, trust your instincts, and have fun playing with it. I'm going kind of in that sort of average block size, meaning we'll end up close-ish, emphasis on the ish, we'll end up close-ish to 12 and a half inches, roughly, maybe not the same height, same width, we'll see, simply because that's easy for viewing, for us to be able to see what's going on there. So let me have a sip of my tea. I'm just coming off a cold. So if you've never heard me speak in any great length before, this is not my normal voice. I'm remembering for all of my Gen X quilters out there, friends, remember when Phoebe got sick and she loved her singing voice because it was deep? That's kind of where I feel like I'm at the moment. Alrighty, so that is fabric. If there's no questions on that, we're going to continue on to the next step, which is making ribbons. Why do we make the ribbons first? It seems counterintuitive, right? When we wrap a present, we wrap the present, then we put the ribbon on and tie the bow, and so the bow comes last. We're doing things the opposite way here with this technique, and there's a very important reason, because if we make our box first, we're doing improv work, right? So we make, a box this big, and then we make a ribbon or a bow, and it only ends up this big. It might look funny on our box. It might look kind of cool. We can play around with scale that way, but it's probably going to look a little awkward and weird, like having a tiny little ribbon there. So it's better to make the bow. I keep saying ribbon and I mean bow. I apologize for that. We're going to make the bow first, and then we'll size our present part to coordinate with the bow. This goes back to, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Mary Ellen Hopkins. She's long since gone, unfortunately. But she was sort of one of the first big famous quilters that I became aware of when I started quilting. I've been quilting now for 27 years, I think. And so in that first year or two, I became aware of Mary Ellen Hopkins and I got the opportunity to see her speak. And something that has always stuck with me since I saw her and then in my years as an improv teacher is you make the smallest thing first because then you can size everything according to that. So in her case, she was saying, if you're going to make little 4 patches to use, as cornerstones across a quilt, like an Irish chain, whatever it is, she was using this example is that you're going to make 4.5 or 4 patches. Make those first, figure out what size they're all ending up to be. Even when you try to precision piece, you might not end up making those the 2.5 inches you thought they were going to be, or 4.5 inches you thought they were going to be. And so if they end up being 4.25, then you just size everything else to match that. And so that was her advice for precision piecing all those years ago, but it's very solid advice for improv as well. So I always say start with what's going to be the smallest thing first, or in our case, the more intricate thing as well. And then we'll size everything to that. So that's what we're going to do is we are going to make our bows before we do anything else. Now let's just shift this a little bit. You can see over my shoulder. Can I zoom in? I can. There we go. There we go. So there was sort of the first block that I pointed out to you. I'm just going to shift that even more and get myself out of the way. There we go. So this is the first block that I showed to you. This was just me playing around with one single present, making sure my contrast was happy, or I was happy with my contrast. And then I have 5 different bow options, from simple to a little more complex. And I think just like having variety under the tree, or on the present table, if it's a birthday or a wedding or something like that, having the variety of the bows in a single project can be really interesting. The other thing is you may like the look of one more than another, and that's totally fine. Everybody's going to have slightly different tastes in doing these. There is a consistency of technique. It may not look like it looking at these, but there is a consistency of techniques so that we're going to be building kind of from the top one down to the bottom. We're going to be building on our technique as we go to make each of the bows. All right. So let's start with the most simple one. I want you to bear with me for 1 second because I'm going to have to move the tripod and it's going to look a little scattered, helter-skelter for a minute. Hi, bear with me. Okay, let's flip you around. You get a little glimpse of my studio, but I want to bring you over here to the cutting table or cutting mat. All right. So let me just adjust that just a little bit. There we go. So you can still see me and I need to be in there, but we're going to go from here. So what we're going to start with is actually our background fabric. And I didn't mention this when we were talking about fabric selection, but you also need a background fabric. So this will be the fabric that will be the background for the bow, and it will also be around the block. So you can see on my original block, my test block for us here is I have the background of the bow has this white fabric, and then I surrounded the rest of the block with it as well. Now, if I were making this block or making a whole bunch of them, I might wait to add, all this background around it. I might just, finish the block like this, right? So I'm not putting the background around the whole present only on the bow part, and that would be fine too. Today when I make them, that's what I'm going to be doing because I don't know how I'm going to want to lay these out. So maybe I'm going to need some variety in how I do those. So we're only worrying about the bow portion at this point. I'm not measuring, but this is too tall. This is my rectangle, and I want this length, but I think it's too tall. So I'm going to slice this in half. For tools that we need in making this, a ruler, one that works well for the size that you're doing. I have my big square one here, but it's a little awkward when I'm doing some of this stuff. So I'll reserve that for squaring up later. So standard rotary cutter, a long ruler, iron, it's over here, iron with a pressing mat. Other things that you may want but are not necessary is a seam roller. These things are very handy, particularly when you have small seams and we're doing a lot of back and forth kind of sewing. You can maybe save a trip to the iron by using one of these. And then another tool that I like is this flatter pressing spray. It is made by Soak, the folks at Soak, who, if you're a knitter, you've probably heard of them. Great Canadian company, woman-owned, fantastic person, Jacqueline, who runs the place. Love this stuff, particularly for improv work in here. I use my fabric unwashed, not starched. Everybody has their own preferences. I don't think there's a right or wrong. So go with what works for you. The only caveat to that being is some of our bows have curves. And when you have fabric that has been starched, it can make the curves a little bit more challenging to do. So if you do really love your starch, what I recommend is holding off on using the starch until you're doing kind of final presses. Don't starch the fabric before you use it. Starch it at the end when you've got your finished bow and you want to make sure the block lays nice and flat. I tend to use the flatter for that purpose. Okay, so that was one digression. I only need one of these at the time, so I'm going to set aside the other one. So I have my rectangle here, and then I want to grab a strip of fabric. How wide should your strip be? It really doesn't matter. I'm going to take this one because I have a couple of different widths of strips that I cut. I don't know the widths of these. I did not actually cut them. I used a straight edge, but I didn't measure. So I don't even care if it's a parallel strip, like a perfectly straight strip. You could use jelly rolls if you have them. You could use scrap strips, leftover binding, or you can just cut some strips. So you can play around with different widths, and that's how you can change up your bows as well. I think I'm going to go with this medium one this time. So I'll set aside the other ones and I'm going to go here. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to kind of play with where I want it. I've cut this rectangle. I'm going to assume I want it roughly in the center. Do you need to mark the center or notice the center particularly? Not really. You just eyeball it. So I'm going to say that's the center. I want to trim my strip. I don't want to have to worry about all this extra fabric. So I'm going to just trim my strip a little bit longer, right? I don't want it the height this way. I want to place it where I think I want my bow to be. So I'm going to go there, and then I'm just going to trim off a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to reserve cutting the second part of the bow until I've sewn this one here. I've still got some wiggle room because I didn't cut it exactly, but the key is you want a little bit of overlap on either end. Just give yourself the wiggle room, make life easier for yourself. And now I'm going to kind of go, okay, where do I want it? I kind of like it there. So the technique that we're going to be using it for this is, I generally refer to it as the super boring name, but I haven't been able to come up with a better one. It's a super boring name called layered angles, meaning we are going to take our fabric and I have it layered right sides up, right? I've got this, my background is a white on white fabric. And so I want to make sure that my print is facing up, and the pink or the bow fabric is also facing up. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a cut roughly. See, I want this kind of angle for here. I'm going to make a cut, in this case, only through the background because I already have a strip cut here on that angle. So can you see that there? Right? I've got one angle cut there. This is the angle that I want for my bow, like that. And so now I need to sew right sides together. So we're cutting right sides up, but we're sewing right sides together. So I'm just going to flip that over like that, and we're going to sew down here. Now, a couple of cautions. When we flip it over, do not come here and flip it over so that you're lining up the edge to the edge right there. Because when we sew that, we're going to end up having to shorten this because this won't have covered all of the background. So that's why I like to have it just a little bit longer, give myself some wiggle room. So I'm going to about a ½ an inch there, and then I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to sew down this seam. It's straight sewing, ½ inch seam allowance. Don't worry about back tacking or tying a knot off or anything, because you would cut it off eventually. None of this sewing is going to have any back stitch in it, and you don't have to worry about that. Everything will be fine. I will bring you over to the machine for some of the more complex ones, but this one's pretty straightforward, right? So we have that, and now it's sewn. So see, I can use my seam roller. You'll notice I didn't say a seam ripper in our supplies because I almost never use one. Not because I don't make mistakes, but because if I make a mistake, I cut it out with the rotary cutter instead. So you'll see what I mean if it happens. Okay, so we have our first one in. Now we need to add the second one, right? I can go ahead and use the cut that I already have. I'm not going to cut a new one because I just want to have this bow be a straight line. This is, like I said, the easiest bow that we're going to do. So I want to show it straightforward. So what I need to do now is flip this over so that we can sew right sides together again. Now, in this case, I do want to pay attention to where I put this. So if I put it, lining up the corner right there, let me just show you. I'm going to stick a pin at the ½ inch mark to be sort of pretend seam here so we can see it. And then if I go to flip it over, can you see what happens with our rectangle now? Look at where this edge is and this edge is. I'm going to end up having to trim off a whole bunch from here and a whole bunch from here just because I lined up those raw edges at the top there. So I don't want to do that because I want to minimize what I trim off, right? So I'm going to bring this down, and here's the rule of thumb. When we're working with angles like this, see this line right here, extend that line out, and you want the point of this piece to be a ½ inch, maybe even a little bit more above that. So there's my point, there's my line, and I have about 5/8 of that above there. Now let's look before I sew. I'll do that pin trick again. And when I flip it over this time, as if it was sewn, I am much closer to having a straight line across. Does it need to be exact? Absolutely not. Right? We are doing improv work. So there's some wiggle there. There will be some trimming, but I'm just trying to minimize the trimming that I need to do and minimizing any potential waste, or rather, I would say maximizing my fabric. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to sew down. I'll move that over so it lines up. I'm going to sew down here with 1/4 of an inch. And that will be the first part of our bow. Okay. So that's the first part of the bow. See, like that? Again, take my seam roller. So we're doing improv work. And if you're new to improv work, there's a couple of things that I should stress. One, and you've already heard me say it, we're using 1/4 inch seam allowance. Doesn't have to be an exact 1/4 inch, no, but be consistent as you can. Number two, we want to press those seams, right? I generally press after every seam. So whether it's with my seam roller or with the iron, I want to press after each seam. And then the third thing is that we will square up. And I prefer to think about it as trimming to square, not necessarily trimming to a specific size, but we'll give ourselves nice, neat edges. We won't keep these flappy bits here and stuff like that. Okay, there's the one side of the bow. Now I want to do the other side of the bow. I can play around with what angle goes on here, which piece of the fabric I want. I'm going to go like that. So again, giving myself just a little bit of wiggle room. I don't need a lot. And a little bit on the bottom, trimming off some stuff. Improv work can get messy, so I like to keep a little bin for all of my trimmings there. So now we're going to go and we're going to make a cut through this background piece and the first part of the bow so we can add this on here. Now, I'm right-handed, so I just need to rotate this so that I can do this cut safely because if I was doing it here, I'm kind of cutting at a weird angle. So I'm just going to rotate this to make that cut. Now, I'm going to take my ruler. You can, if I cut right at the intersection between my first bow and the background, when I sew this piece in, right, we're going to have our point, we're getting close to our point kind of right at the bottom. I like a little bit of overlap in these blocks because one, we're going to have to trim up and I don't know exactly where that line will end up being. So I don't want to worry so much about where this point is and then end up losing it and being upset about that. I'm not one likely to get upset by that, but some people might. But I also just like the overlap because I like the idea of there being a little bit more fabric there because bows often have that. So I'm moving it up. You can see there's quite a bit here. So I'm going to go right there and I've cut that apart. And now I want to do exactly what I did the first time is I'm going to sew this strip to this piece. Again, making sure I have overhang at both the top and the bottom. And I will go down and I will sew along that seam. I love that you're all saying hi to each other. Good greetings in there. I know that since coming onto YouTube a little bit more, I have a lot more followers here and new ones who maybe have never seen me before. So welcome, welcome. Usually the people that are hanging out with me are a good bunch. So I love that you're saying hi to each other. Okay. And now we just have to sew this piece on. You see how I have this extra little bit here because I really kind of came up with that. I could go ahead and sew that on and have it down here and kind of have it be more of a crisscross kind of idea. I don't love that, if I'm being honest. So I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to cut this off. But if I just, take that off, I'm going to be left with this weird angle here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recut this. I'm going along the same line so that it is parallel. And just remove that. And then now I don't have to worry about that extra little bit. You may or may not have it. The first couple of times I did it, I didn't have it. So it wasn't a big deal. Okay, so again, I want to have that overhang of the point. So if this is my line here, I don't want this to be lining up with the edge of the line, because then when I sew it, I'm going to have this big gap. So I want to actually slide that down a little bit more. We'll go there. The more you do them, the more comfortable you'll get with it, and you'll see what those things are. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew down that. We're going to have, whoops, dropped my seam roller. That's our first bow. It's super straightforward and easy, right? Let me just do that seam roller. Before I go to trim this or anything, I will give it a proper press with the iron. Really straightforward kind of graphic thing. Let me just give you a quick pressing here. So on the back, I've pressed everything towards the ribbon. And this is especially important for me because I have that pink fabric that's the ribbon and a white background. And it also helps design-wise, it helps the ribbon pop out from the fabric. There will be some techniques where doing that might be a bit more of a challenge just because of bulk, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But now I have this nice flat block. You can use a little bit of flatter if it's not wanting to stay flat for you. I love steam in my iron as well, although I think I'm out of water at the moment, but that's fine. So we get a nice flat block. Now at this point, you can leave this. You don't have to do anything else to this. You can get roughly how big it is, right? Like I'm about 12 thing there. So it helps you go to your block. But I like to leave these things untrimmed until I've made a few, and then maybe they're going to tell me what size they want to be. Like, do I want them all the same or do I want them different? Maybe I don't want this one quite as tall. Maybe, maybe I'm going to trim it this way and it's just going to be a short block. I don't know. So until I do know, I'm just going to leave it. And we'll trim it up afterwards. Okay, we're going to go on to the next technique. Now, this one, we're going to be making this bow. Now, you might be looking at this and going, oh, there's a flying geese block. And you wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but we are not making it anything like a standard flying geese. We're actually going to be doing it very similar in that layered angle style. And it comes together really, really quite easily. So you're going to start with another rectangle, right? We've got a nice big one. And then your bow fabric, you're going to start with a rectangle or a square, whatever you want of it. And we're going to have these, again, layered right sides up. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to actually make a straight cut here, just up and down. I can, by having the this was freehand cut, let's say. So it didn't have nice, pretty edges. So this gives me, I just trimmed off, a tiny little bit. It gives me a nice straight edge. And then I have these two together. So now I put them right sides together and I sew down this seam. So that's what I'm going to do first. Enjoy your supper, Lynn. Remember, if you're watching this at any point and you've got to leave, because we all have lives, don't worry, it's on YouTube, so it's going to be here and you can come back. I will be saving it and it will stay here on YouTube so you can come and watch at your convenience at another time. Okay, so there's the first seam. Now, I don't want to do this and just join it together. What I want to do is that layered angle again. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to layer these right sides up, right? I've got my white background and I have this, and I need to overlap them. If I overlap them just a little bit and I go to make a cut, let's say like this, because I want to have that nice kind of triangle shape here, this is what you need to do. You need to flip back that and double check that your background is all the way under. Because if I had it layered like that and I cut, then I wouldn't have enough background here to sew the whole piece to. So I need to shift this basically all the way over and maybe even a little bit more so that there's some, you can see here, some overlap between the piece that I just sewed and the existing background. I have some overlap. And then I'm going to lay this here and I'm going to go, okay, if I do that, will I have the whole thing covered? And I will. You can go right to the edge of this piece, or if you don't want to go quite to that angle, you can come in a little bit. And here maybe I'll come in a little bit and change that angle, but I'm going to test and see I don't have enough. So then I need to overlap even more, and that's fine. Totally fine. So now I've double checked and I have enough there. So that's the angle that I'm going to go with. So I cut through both pieces, right? The bow piece and the background. We'll just leave that there. And then I'm going to flip this over to go right sides together. Remembering that overlap of the point, I want to give myself some wiggle room there. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to sew down that entire seam. Okay, and there we have that first bit. Right, here's a great example. I did not test, and I'm also not going to care that much. Right, for that overlap, if I look here, I'm kind of lined up here, but because I've got, a 1/4 inch more here at the bottom, am I going to worry about it? No. Not even a little bit. Okay, so now for this next one, I can take this piece that I cut off and I can use it here and repeat that process. I'm just going to cut an angle and sew that in. Again, let me rotate just for safety's sake. I'm going to use the angle of the triangle that I have. That means this angle, like if we imagine a dividing line here, this angle of the triangle and this angle of the triangle are not necessarily 45-degree angles. I could recut this to make it that way. So in that case, I would cut it, right? I would come in and try to, I can even use my ruler, right? Like I can go up there and make sure I have that sort of same angle. You do have ruler or angle lines on your ruler, so that makes it there. But you know what, just freewheel it, have some fun. It doesn't have to be perfect. I am not a person who, when I wrap my presents, has them be all exacting either. So you know what? Let's just go for it and have some fun. So there, that's what I'm going to cut. I'm just going to cut this little dog ear off there so it just doesn't get caught in the way. You can see both sides. So go ahead and we'll sew that. Alrighty. And then we have this piece there. Now, one thing I didn't talk about when we were talking about fabric selection is what your prints are on your fabric. Of course, you could do these with solids. But if you want to use a print for the bow and especially for the background, I do not recommend using a directional print. So this is not the time to use a stripe like this. Is it possible to do all of this with a directional print? Yes, but it's going to require you to really think and pay attention to how you use your fabrics when you're cutting it. So I have this great all over print. I don't really care what direction it goes in. So for example, one of the things that if I had, this white was a directional print, the next step that I'm going to sew, right, because I have this background piece, I can go like this and I want to do a straight line. But remember, see how far I came down? If I wanted to come in that far here, I have this angle. So my solution personally would be to just flip this around and then I will end up trimming off this triangle here. If I have directional prints, maybe the solution would have been going this way. But if I had a directional print, now I've changed the direction of the background, right? So it's going to vary for everybody a little bit, but until you have a really solid feel for the technique, I would skip directional prints for now. I'm going to go like this. So remember, we're layering right sides up, and I'm just going to cut off this triangle right now so it's not distracting us, right? I layered right sides up, and I decided to go there. I'm going to have this one be a wonky bow. So that the points are not going to be at the same height. The angles were at different heights, just a little bit of a different look. Now, if this piece that I'm sewing on now, if what I had left over from my initial background triangle, or background rectangle, I should say, and I thought it was too small, for what I have there, I can just cut another piece of background fabric to get me there. But that's our second bow. She deserves a proper pressing, so let's do that. Right, I like to do it from the back to make sure that I've got nice crisp lines on my seams, especially when I've got this high contrast fabric. Keep in mind, I am pressing. I am not ironing a blouse here or a set of slacks. I'm lifting the iron. It's almost imperceptible from your angle, but I'm lifting the iron and pressing. Right, so when I go to trim, I will obviously give myself a nice straight edge along there and go from there. But that's, that's a different kind of bow, kind of a fun and funky one in there. This is definitely funkier than my first one, right? That was the first one. I was pretty similar on my angles and they end at pretty close to the same ones. This one's a little freer, we'll say. And that's bow number 2. Okay, this is what we're going to do for bow number 3. Completely different effect, but the exact same technique. We're going to be doing those layered angles as well. We're going to go across with our layered angles, but there is one big difference. It's what we start with here. Okay. Hey, better late than never, right? I'm happy you're here. For everyone who is joining relatively recently, we're halfway through, but that's okay because there will be the recording available and you can hang out with us. We've done fabric selection and 2 different bow techniques, and we are about to start another bow technique. So I'm going to grab another piece of fabric. We'll move you back over here. And I'm just going to, as I go, move any of these little trimmings out of the way. Okay, so I want to cut a rectangle to start with. This is a fairly large piece, so I'm going to cut part way. Oops, I guess I should start at the beginning there. And then cut a little bit. But having that extra length is actually going to be quite handy for me. So I need some pieces here. I'm going to go about there. That's the rectangle I want to start with, but I actually need this too, because what I need to do is sew a piece here, and this is how I'm going to make my raise. So it's kind of exciting. There's like an extra step before we do that layered angle approach. So I do not have one cut, but that's okay. I can go to my bow fabric and I'm going to just take this and go, okay, that's about the same length that I want. Yes, I am freehand cutting it because it really doesn't matter at this point. We can freehand cut so much of this and then worry about making it straight and square at the end. Okay, so I have this and I have my background. What I need to do is sew these together. And yes, they're very long. They're much longer than the strips that we did before. When I cut these into strips, they will be much longer, but we need that wiggle room. So give yourself the extra fabric. Don't worry about it. I think there's this perception in improv sewing that there's a lot of waste. And it isn't an entirely unfair perception. However, what we need to think about is not so much the perception of waste, but the understanding that we're creating more scraps, which is a good or a bad thing for some people. But I need the wiggle room to do it, and I'm okay with that. Also, we all have so much fabric. Let's be honest. The vast majority of us have more fabric than we'll ever use. And so don't feel afraid to use it. I'm just going to give this a proper press with the iron. It's also why I recommended using scraps to play with to start, because you'll feel less precious about the fabric, especially when you're experimenting or trying something for the first time. Okay, so we have this. Now we need to make our wedges. Remember in the first one we had our just strips. That's effectively what we're creating. It's just that we needed background included on that strip. So I am a baker, so I'm used to dividing things up by cutting through the middle and then cutting in half again. So that's how I'm going to do this. Am I measuring? Nope. I'm just eyeballing the cutting through the half. They don't even need to be perfectly straight or parallel here. So that's given us 4 strips. I'm going to show you how to do it with 4. You could do it with 3. You could do it with 5. 5 might start getting to be a lot of bulk. Even with 4, there's a fair amount of bulk in the center of the bow. Totally manageable, but it is there. Okay, so let's set 3 of these aside because we do this one at a time, just like before. So we're going to lay our strip onto our piece and we're going to say, where do we want the angle to be? Now, in this case, rather than following the line of my strip, I'm going to actually turn this into a little bit of a wedge, meaning I will be cutting through both of these, and I'll be turning my strip kind of into that shape as I go. So the first one kind of just gives us a starting point, and we'll go from there. And now I did a mistake that I told you not to do. Can you see what it is? I didn't pull this down far enough. So thankfully, I have lots of extra up here that I can pull this down. Do I need to pull it all the way to the end? No, because this is going to get cut off as well. So I don't have to stress too much about that, but I do want to give myself, you know, a fighting chance on this not becoming a tiny, tiny block. Because that's the other thing to remember. The more seams we cut into this, the smaller it's going to get. So there's the first one, right? I cut my wedge and I have to sew it to this piece. We leave this one here for now. So I'm just going to do that, move them right sides together, and then I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to sew it from this side down the machine just so I can see and I make sure that this doesn't, you know, kind of get stitched back the wrong way. All right. Jackie just joined us and she said she was putting her tree up, and now that it is up and lit, she's ready to sit down and watch. I love it, Jackie. What a great way to relax and to enjoy the tree. In our family, here's some Christmas traditions that I will tell you. Let me do the next instruction first. Okay, so now we have the first one. Remember I said I wanted to kind of create a wedge, so I'm not going to use this angle as it is, because if I do, this is going to turn this into some kind of weird, not rectangular shape. My goal is to kind of try to keep that rectangle shape as best I can. So I want to layer these fabrics, again, keeping in mind kind of roughly where that is, roughly where the bottom is, and I'm going to layer them right sides up, and then I'm going to place my ruler and I'm going to cut another cut. I'm going to pull this back, make sure I can see everything. I don't want to go to a point here. I want to give myself, you know, at least a quarter, if not half an inch on that end of the wedge. So there, I'm going to go like that. Discard this piece. And now I'll fold this piece of background over, and that little funny wedge shape goes over for the scrap bin. Now, before I sew this together, I might do that pin trick again, just to double check where it's going to be when I sew it. Right, so when I sewed it down, that's not folding over nicely there. When I sew down, see, I've got this big chunk here, so I need to slide it kind of up this way. So I'm going to slide it to about there, and then I can fold it over and check. And I've still got some wiggle room, so I'm going to slide it just a touch more. You're never going to be perfect and exact, but that's okay. That's kind of the freedom in doing this, is that you don't have to be perfect and exact. Okay, so back to the tree. Our family tradition, which really, frankly, came from my husband's side of the family, is to go to the forest and chop down our tree. We don't go to a tree farm. We go to, we can go out into the mountains here, and there are a couple of designated areas that you're allowed to go chop your tree. So that's what we go do. And in all honesty, it's my favorite day of the holiday season. Like, I like it more than Christmas itself, is the day that we go chop our tree down. We bring snacks and we bundle up, and it becomes a whole day affair, and we take a ridiculously large tree, but don't worry, we use it all at home, and then we save it and use it for bonfires in the summer. And it costs us $5 for the permit to go do that. and the gas and the food and all that stuff too. But we usually do that the last weekend before Christmas. We don't put it up too far in advance. Okay, but then we keep it up till usually mid-January because I'm Ukrainian, and Ukrainian Christmas is January 6th, 7th, and then Malanka, which is New Year's, is the 14th. So I often have it up till about then. Okay, that's one. Do you see how we got this kind of one little sort of wedge? We're going to grab another one now, and we're going to repeat the process. I want to, just like before, overlap a little bit with one of my, with my bit here, instead of, you know, putting it all the way over here. You could, it's a design choice, but I just think it looks a little bit better if it is overlapped somewhat. And I want it kind of at that angle. If you were doing 3, you might kind of have an angle, one straight up and one at the angle. You know what? That's what I'm going to do this time because we have one with 4. So I'm going to do one a little more like this. I'm just going to have just the slightest of angles on it there. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And then we'll have a variation on the one that I showed you before. So I layered them right sides up, and then I sew right sides together. I should also say that my husband, I don't know why it's my favorite day, because my husband refers to it as Murder the Tree Day. I mean, that is what we're doing, but it seems kind of rude for a Christmas tradition, but that's what we call it. Okay, so there's that first one, right? Yeah, I like this. This one's going to just be 3, because why not? And I'm going to overlap my fabrics as well. I am going to do what I'm doing on every other one. I'm going to lay my ruler on top, flip this back so I can double check. I can't flip it back that much, but I can double check that I have background all along the bottom. You'll see when I take this off, right? I've got background sort of start to finish. And then I'm going to flip this over and sew down that seam. Right? We're going to sew down that now. That was a mostly vertical cut, so I'm just double checking a little bit, but I don't have to worry quite too much about, you know, that shifting along the bottom line, that bottom edge of the rectangle. How many of you are like big time wrapping presents people? I know some folks who just absolutely love wrapping presents, and others who do it because it has to be done. I am the latter. I'd rather make a quilt block of a present than wrap presents, if I'm being honest. But I love the folks that really get into the wrapping. My mother-in-law is one of them. We always joke about gifts being grandma wrapped, because she has a tendency to put a lot of little things in one present, but then she wraps each one and ties each one with a bow inside a bigger box that is wrapped and tied with lots of ribbon. So yeah, some of you are saying that you love wrapping presents. You love all the Christmas traditions, but which one's your favorite? Which one's your favorite? What was your name again? Jennifer. Which one's your favorite Christmas tradition? I just gave you mine. What's yours? So now I'm going to do this last one as well. And we'll kind of see, none of them are going to be at sort of the same angle, which is going to be kind of fun. So we're going to go there. Just going to see where I'm at on the bottom. I want to kind of make sure, just like before, that I have overlap here, so they don't just look like individual sticks kind of sticking up. I want some of that overlap there. So cut that first side of my wedge so I can see that I'm going to have some overlap. And then I'm going to flip that over. I have a lot of this here, so I'm just going to trim it off so I don't have to worry about sewing it. There, oh, what happened to the chat? I don't know what just happened to the chat. It all went different. I didn't touch anything. Let's see if I can figure this out. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to try to see what happened. There we go. I don't need that. There's the chat. Delivering cookies, getting the tree, decorating the tree, all good ones, Jennifer. I still got to do all my baking, but I did make my list for it, so I think I'll start tomorrow. Frida says she puts them in gift bags, and this year she's hoping to make some fabric drawstring bags. Me too. And I was actually thinking I might use these blocks as the front of the bags. So it gets very kind of meta. I'm a bit silly that way, but it gets very meta, and we have like a gift on a gift in a gift bag, that sort of thing. I thought it could be kind of fun. And then the thing I was thinking of the gift bags for was, I'll tell you in 1 second. Okay, so now I want to cut this last one. Again, I want to make sure I have overlap where I'm going to go, and I just need to rotate that a little bit. So I'm there, and I'm going to have overlap everywhere, and so that's what I'm going to do. Whoops. Hold that away. So just make sure that when I sew that, and then it flips back over, yeah, I'll be happy. Yeah, I was thinking, my husband and I, you know, people have their love languages. My husband's is gifts, and he goes overboard with gifts and buys way too much, spends too much money, and I've given up trying to rein him in on that. But we have always both bought things for our kiddos' stockings. And it ends up being that there's way too much than fits in their stockings. So it's kind of, you know, a very generous thing on our parts, but also a bit ridiculous because we do that much. But what we do, I thought about it last night, is I have handmade stockings that I had made everybody, and they're all personalized, that I would cut apart their stockings, and the personalized kind of thing on it, I would put that on the front of a drawstring bag, so we'd have the bags instead of the stockings. So that's what I was thinking of doing them for. Okay, there's that bow. How does that look? That's kind of fun. Let's look at the original one that I did with 4. Right, so there's 4 and there is 3. Completely different look, but there is another sort of thing there. Oh, Jackie says her favorite family get-together, Christmas Eve, for the meal, the board games, and opening presents. I love it. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to show just the trimming now, because it looks better when it's all trimmed, particularly with this block. So let's set that aside. The first thing I'm going to do is, I'm not focused on this being a specific size. I just want to maximize the size out of this block. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to kind of see, okay, sorry, I need to see it the right way. So I can get 8 inches. And I can get kind of a maximum of 3 1/4 inches in width and 8 inches in length. I don't know what I want this for, so I'm going to go for that maximum, even though it sounds like kind of a weird amount. But I can always trim it down, or I can always add more background to the sides or the top later. Right? You're not beholden to whatever size you trim it down to. It's just giving you somewhere to start with when it comes to the bottom part. So there. See what a difference it makes when you trim it up. So there's one with 3 and one with 4. Completely different looks, but both kind of cool. Okay. Now we're going to get really funky And we're going to throw some curves into this because bows do have curves, don't they? So this is going to be a very similar technique to what we've done in the very first one, except we're going to have a curve on one side. And then I'm looking at this, you could add a third curved piece in there for your bow or 4. The only thing is we don't need to add on those extra bits. We can just work with what we have. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to grab that rectangle again. I'm going to just take this piece and I'm going to cut it in half, work with a bit of a smaller rectangle this time. And we'll just get rid of any of these extra little bits so they're not distracting. And I'm going to take, I've got the pink here. We're going to go with this pink. So again, I want to kind of cut a piece that's a little bit longer, give myself some wiggle room to play with. Okay, don't be scared of the curve. If you've never done curves before, I got to tell you, improv curves are the easiest thing you could do. They're really, really not scary. And I'm here to hold your hand for the process along the way. So what we're going to do, same thing as we were doing every other time, we're layering our fabrics right sides up. And we're going to cut through both of the fabrics and then we're going to sew right sides together. The only difference is that instead of using the ruler, we're going to freehand cut a curve. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just start and I'm going to cut an arc. That's it. Just one arc. I didn't start on the edge of the fabric there. So you can see if I pull this bit away, I don't need that fabric. We have that nice arc there. Now I don't need that fabric for the time being, so I'm just going to put it aside. And I have these 2 fabrics. I like that this is a lot longer because it gives me some wiggle room. And because what's missing, if you've ever done traditional curves, you need seam allowances. And we don't have them because we cut them together. So this is going to shrink a little bit no matter what. So having that, just that little bit of wiggle room. What you don't want to do is pull this down and start sewing there, because look, that curve, the curve on the pink and the curve on the white, they don't match anymore. And the trick to having the block stay as flat as possible, because it will stay flat, is sewing this where the curves match. So I can take a pin if I want, just to highlight where that is, or I can just carefully flip it over. And I'm going to go to the machine with it in that shape, that position. I know it doesn't look like it's going to come together. I promise you it will. So this time I'm actually going to move the camera over here so you can see me sew. Just make sure that angle is working. There we go. Okay, so at the machine, normal, assuming we all knew a normal stitch length, normal presser foot on. Again, we're aiming for a consistent seam allowance. And that's it. So I'm going to get this into the machine. I am only worried at this point. Let's see if I can zoom in just a little bit for you. I am only worried at this point about the 1 inch in front of the needle. I'm not worried the fact that this doesn't line up at all. I only worrying about what's here. So as I move, I'm just going to continue to guide the fabric into the position that I want, just that 1 inch at a time in front of the needle. Now it's it looks like this underneath, just, you know, where it kind of bunches up. Let's see if I can zoom in that more. Does she want to stay zoomed in? I don't think it does. Okay, So we're just gonna, yeah, she's not staying zoomed in. Apologies for that. On the next one, I'll change the angle. You might need to lift the presser foot and adjust. The one thing you want to be careful when you're doing is that you don't get folds, but that's okay. Just stop and check periodically. And you don't want to stretch it out. You've got a lot of bias here, and it's very easy to stretch it out. So we just want to make sure we're guiding it versus forcing it into position. So you'll see, look at that beautiful curve now. Can you see that? It's gorgeous. It lays wonderfully. Yes, we have all this extra fabric, but that's okay. Gives us wiggle room. I'm going to take you over to the iron, and we're going to press this. This is not one for the seam roller. This is definitely one for the iron. In all likelihood, your curve is going to want to go towards the bow fabric. So just listen to it and press it gently. Again, don't reef and stretch it out. We're just pressing nicely. You can use your flatter or some steam to make sure that's nice and flat. See how gorgeous that is? It comes together so nicely. Okay, that's the first side. Now we got to do the next bit here. So we have that leftover rest of the background fabric. And what we're going to do on this particular bow is we're going to cut a straight line. So we're doing one side curved, one side with an angle. Just like before, we want to make sure I've got enough background behind it. And it's going to create just this kind of pretty little nice bow. That's a pretty useful scrap, so I would definitely keep that. See how it's so tiny. It's just like a sliver of a bow. Give yourself some wiggle room at the top and the bottom. You don't have to cut off the points. Depending on where you cut your straight line, it will be bigger or smaller. But just once you've done it a few times, you'll get a little bit of playtime. So then now I'm going to sew that together, and I'm going to have just a sliver of a bow. But I really quite like this one. It's very delicate. It's a bit of a different look. It would probably look good when we get to the present portion to have like a really skinny ribbon on the present, or maybe with a small present, right? So there's just our tiny little sliver of a bow. I love it. I love it. It's so just so different than the other ones. I'm going to give this a press. This is definitely one that we need to really press as we go, not just use the seam roller. Because the next thing we're going to cut is we're going to cut another curve with that. So I like giving myself sort of a bigger piece to work with. It just gives you the sort of the wiggle room. Because if let's say you think, oh, well, I had this skinny little piece and I can use this. Cutting that curve is going to be hard to kind of get a good arc that leaves you with a good finished arc, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go like that. I can feel where this one is on the bottom. I will probably overlap or maybe just cut right beside it a little bit, but then I'm going to cut through. Remember, I layered right sides up and cut through both the bow and the background. And now I have this background or bow that I can sew on here. Remember, I don't want to start at the edges of the fabric. I want to have that overlap like this. Let's go to the machine and I will show you that again. But this time I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit for you. Just let me get it in the machine. There we go. And I'm going to bring this over here and I am going to lower it down. Not that one. which is, that's the one I want. Nope. There, that zooms it in a little bit. Go a little bit more. Bear with me with the wiggling. Sorry. Okay, that should be a little bit more zoomed in. There, that should be good. Should be able to see nicely there. Okay, so remember, I've got just the top in there, and then I'm gonna only worry about that 1 inch in front of the needle at a time, and then I'm gonna line it up as I go. If I worry about getting this lined up here, look at that hot mess that happens there. Apologies, my son, I forgot to turn my notifications off. And I'm just gonna go 1 inch at a time and guide the fabric as I go. What's really fascinating about most of these improv curves is your machine actually kind of does a lot of the work for you, especially if you have a dual feed foot. It doesn't fight you. It does it a lot of the work for you. And there is that curve. So again, let's go over here, give this a nice press. And then we'll do the last bit. Right, so it's big at this point. And you could cut your angle like this and have a much bigger curve. But I really like this sort of delicate nature of what we have. I'm just, again, turning this on the angle so I can see. And I want to have kind of, I'm going to come in quite a bit here. There, I think I'll be good there. Right, so now I'm going to sew this last one on, and we'll have just this precious little bow there. So more folks coming on and saying hi. Minnesota, how is the weather there? You tend to be pretty similar to us. We had snow last night. We had snow twice this week, so it's like, it is a Hallmark Christmas out there for sure, with the snow. So hopefully it sticks around for us. We get weather phenomenons called Chinooks here, which can really warm up the weather like 10 to 20 degrees Celsius in a day. And then everything melts and it's brown and it's ugly. So I'm hoping the snow sticks around. The weather doesn't, for the next week, seems to be staying cool. Okay, I'm just pressing this, and then I will show you that. Oh, so pretty. I really like that one. The first one that I did is a lot longer, but the same idea. And I actually think it could be really interesting if you did 3 like we did in the previous bow. I think that could be a really neat effect as well. So maybe after the class, I will be trying that one. So we have one more bow, and then we're going to move on to the gifts. The gifts are pretty easy. They're straightforward. The bow is where all the fun really is. We've got this bow. A little bit more like maybe bunny ears, which is kind of fun. And you'll see this one I didn't quite line up here in the center. Again, different look. It's okay. We'll see how it goes on the next one that I do here. This one is actually almost identical to the previous one. It's just that instead of cutting that straight, we're just going to cut another curve. So it's curve, 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 curve. So we'll do this one. Alrighty, so there's our background piece. I think I have a big rectangle here. Yep, but she's got a fold in it, so I'm just gonna press that out. Okay, same as before, we're gonna lay our right sides up and we're gonna cut that curve like that. We're getting to be quite used to this process now, but never hurts to see things again. So again, I will move the camera so that we can see. I want to know, because I'm going to start baking my cookies tomorrow. My daughter actually is just finishing up her cookies. She's going with her school friends. They are doing a cookie exchange, which I thought was kind of cute. So she made these chocolate chip cookies that she's become famous for. But she also made one of our family favorites. They're Nanaimo Bar Cookies. So my Canadians on the call know what a Nanaimo bar is. But these are cookies that you make like a chocolate coconut cookie, and then you pipe the Nanaimo bar filling on the inside, or like you make a little divot like a thumbprint cookie, and you pipe that filling in, and then you drizzle with chocolate. We actually really like them because they're not as sweet as most Nanaimo bars, but you still get that really strong Nanaimo bar flavor. So she was making those. So there's our first curve. And we're going to repeat the process, except this time we're going to do a curve on the other side. So remember last time we cut straight, right? This time I'm going to cut another curve. Now, I do like to kind of create that sort of orange peel kind of shape when we think about a traditional block by kind of coming in on the point. The point's going to come in even more on the white because the background, once I've sewn the seam allowance, will do that. So this time, remember every other time I've been starting my sewing up at the top, I'm actually going to start my sewing here. And the reason for that is it's always easier to have this concave curve on the bottom when you sew. So I'll line it up there, flip it around, and sew like that. And still on the topic of cookies, I always think about, well, what cookies would I should try some new ones this year. And then I ask the family, and they all want the same ones. So I don't know how many new ones, but there are a couple new ones I wanted to try. I wanted to make some pignoli, I think that's how you say it, which is like an Italian almond cookie. They look really good, and I got the good almond paste. I know you can make it yourself, but I just bought the good stuff at the Italian Center. I always make this chewy chocolate gingerbread from Martha Stewart. That's kind of the quintessential, now I know it's Christmas cookie. So there's the first one. It's like a combination of a ginger snap and a chewy chocolate chip cookie. It's so good. So we've got one side done. Now we're just going to repeat. Give that a good press. You do want it, if you can keep it staying flat as you go, you have more success at the end. There we go. Right, so there's the one. And now I am going to cut another. Don't have any under. I'm going to risk it. Remember I was saying don't necessarily use the skinny pieces? I don't want to cut another big long strip. So I'm going to risk it with this. But I already kind of have a bit of a curve going there. So I'm going to let that edge be my guide. There we go. So I've got that. Oh, I feel like I moved that. So I just want to place this where it lines up. There we go. Okay, we are getting there, folks. This is the last bow, and then I want to do presents with you before we wrap up for the day. Okay, there's a Nanaimo cookie. Sounds yummy. Where do we get the recipe? Okay, I will before we go, I'll tell you where it is now, but I can probably find the link in about 2 minutes, and not even, in 30 seconds, and post it. But I got the recipe from my friend Julie Van Rosendaal, who is an amazing, amazing food writer and cookbook author, and cooking teacher here in Calgary. And so if you Google dinner with Julie, Nanaimo Bar Cookie, you'll find the recipe. It should be the first link on the page, but I can also do that for you and post it. I'll just finish this last bow. So this one's going to be skinny because I don't have a lot to curve around here, and I'm going to be very careful when I cut. There we go. I'm happy with that. But yeah, when she first shared that, and I don't think she, to be honest, I think she got it from like a flower company. Like it wasn't, whoops. Let me start over. I had a mistake sewing this because the background piece went under my machine. Let's start over again. But when she posted it the first time, I was like, that sounds amazing. And we've been making them every year. I do make regular Nanaimo bars for Christmas too. I have to hide them because I keep them in the fridge, but if I keep them in the fridge and not the freezer, they're gone like within 2 days of making them, which is kind of annoying if you're trying to save them for giving away cookies for tree chopping day. So you're on your third batch of Pfeffernuss cookies, the German pepper spice. Yes, I know what those are. I've never made them. We even had a German girl staying with us last October and November, but we never made them. Okay, so that little bow is quite a bit skinnier and not as curved because I use that little piece. So do as I say, not as I do in this case. But we're going to give this a good press. It still has a great look. Definitely needs to be cleaned up with squaring up or trimming because this one's definitely kind of wild and wonky. And I will for sure be cutting off points when I trim that, but that's okay. It's fine. That's the thing with improv, is we can't get upset about missing points or things not being exactly the way that we want them to be because they are the way they are. And it still looks good. If missing points are going to stress you out, then practice, 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 or try a different technique. That's all. It's not a big deal. So there, I've trimmed that one. You can see it still has a neat effect, right? Still gives a pretty little bow there. Okay, those are all of our bows. We have seen, now I'm going to move you here, all 5 bows. Right now we got to talk about presents. Because we want to make our presents in proportion to the bows that we have. So I've got a few presents, right? The original one here has the cross, typical kind of thing. I made one earlier that just has a single look. I actually thought this one looked really nice with that bow. Right? But it might look kind of funny, this big present with that tiny little bow. Right? It's got a different effect. This one's bigger, so maybe, you know, she looks a little bit better there. So you got to kind of think about proportion with our bows. So I have a whole bunch of different rectangles and squares that we can play with, right? Trying some different sort of impacts with things. We also can have our presents be tall versus horizontal, right? I think that one with this bow. Oh yeah, I like that. This one, let's see, maybe this one will go nicely there. Right, we can play with it, or maybe that one goes with this, or maybe I cut out a nice little square to go with it. I have this fabric, right, which has all of these cute little figurines on it. So this is the one I'm going to make a present with to show you how to do the ribbon portions. So let's figure out which bow we want with her. I think we're going to go with that one. How do we like that? Yeah. So this is the one we're going to pair up. So let's go on here. You found the recipe. Perfect. So again, that was, if you could post the link for me, that would be fantastic. And then that saves me looking it up while I'm teaching. Okay. So to make the presents, I'm going to grab a thicker strip. I've got different strips, right? I've got thicker, I have thinner, I have even a thicker one that I have cut. And you can play around with this, right? I could do, ooh, that could be kind of fun if I did all three, right? And my present was just these 3 strips. That could be actually really kind of cool. What's our time? Like, I'm going to do this one really quickly, and then I'm going to show you another one because I really like that look of the 3 going across there. What you have to think about is when you sew these, where is your bow going to be in relation to your ribbons on the presents? So if I was only going to do one, do I want my ribbon to be kind of all the way on the side with just the bow in the middle, or would I want the bow to be, or the ribbon to be in the middle of what's going to be the bow? As I was laying these out, I kind of liked that they would sort of fall under where the ribbon is in this case. So that's what I'm going to go with. So I'm just going to take this. We're going to do it a lot like the very first one that we did, is we're going to just cut, in this case, parallel, and I'm going to sew this here. Now, the fun thing about this technique is we're not going to remove this fabric from the background. It's just going to shift everything over a little bit. So you'll see what I mean here in a second. So there is my first one, right? And then rather than cutting and removing this piece of fabric, I'm just going to sew it on there. So you can actually see like the design continues on either side. So it's pretty straightforward, and we can always adjust the size of these after we finish. There we go. Let me hit that with the iron. Again, I'm going to press towards the ribbon fabric just so it pops off the present. Think about it, a present, the ribbon is on top of the wrapping paper. So we want to do the same thing here. Okay, there's the first one. Now I'm going to add the second one. Let's try to maintain this little girl here. So I'm going to cut just to the side of her. And I can use my existing ribbon to, mark a straight line. I'm not saying, oh, it has to be exactly this far apart. I'm just using it as a straight line, that edge. And then I'll sew this one on here. It's funny to me too, still talking about Christmas cookies, about how, each person in our family has kind of the one that they love the most and the one that they think of the most. I know my oldest, she loves one that I grew up with that we call Christmas jewels. And so she insists that that be on the list every year, even though really her and I are the only ones that eat them. And it makes a big pan, but we plug away with them. So there, see, I've got my little girl. Now I'm gonna sew this last one on and then we'll add the last strip. The Christmas jewels are, you do a cookie base, and then the top of it is you mix nuts, like salted nuts, and those glacé cherries and chocolate chips. And then you just do eggs and brown sugar and stir it all together and then pour it on top of the cookie base and then bake it together again. So it's kind of a chunky bar cookie. But yeah, she loves them. And yeah, they're really good. So I'm not going to complain. Okay, so we're going to go there. Now I could, if I wanted to, how far? I did about an inch and a half there. So really I cut 2 inches because seam allowances, or sorry, 1 3/4 inches is what I cut because I already had a seam allowance there. So if I'm going to make that parallel, that's what I'm going to do. Just because that's what I had. And then we'll sew this last one. Oh, cut into the angel's wings, but that's okay. Just her wing. So. Alrighty. And then we just have the last one. And then this present is done. Bit of a different kind of wrapping. Instead of just doing 1, you could always do 2. 3 just is what called out to me on this instance. But the next thing I'm going to do just before we finish up for the day is show you how to do the wrap, like the cross and cross. So there's that gift. And I'm also going to show you before we finish up this part here is attaching the bow to the present and what we need to do to make that happen. You can see it's a straight seam, right? But so we need to put these 2 together. Now in this case, my bow fabric or my bow section, it's wider than my gift. So I have 2 choices. I can either add background to this to make it the width of the bow piece that I have, or I can trim off the edges of the bow piece so that it's contained within what I have for the gift. And I think that's what I'm going to do. But before I do that, I've got to figure out, you know, how I'm going to put this together. And I've just got to say, without even trying, the width of these pieces of ribbon are almost identical to the width of my bow, and I did not plan that. But I'm quite excited by it. So here's what I've got to do. I have this piece nicely trimmed. This is a hot mess, right? It's not a straight thing. I can take the ruler, slice, give myself a nice straight cut, or I can just go right ahead and flip this over and cut them, not even at the same time because the one is cut, but use that bow section as my guide with the ruler, of course, and trim that off. And now I'm going to sew those together, and this present is done. I'm just going to make sure I don't kind of flip any of my seam allowances as I go. Make sure they stay the direction they're supposed to be in. Alrighty, there we go. How cute is that? So let's give that a press. I'm gonna press up towards the bow, but you can press in either direction. It just kind of went that way. And then what I'm gonna do is give this a nice trim all the way around so it looks like a pretty little present. And then we'll go from there. So what size can I get? I can get 10 3/4 width pretty easily, and I can get 11 1/2 height wise. I'm gonna go for a square and go 10 3/4 in all directions. And nice and, yeah, there's nothing to trim there. So I've got nice straight corner there, flip that block around, and we're gonna go 10 3/4. So I'll be trimming off a little bit from the bottom of the present there, but that's fine. I wanna make it all look nice and neat. And there is that one present. Bit of a different look, so then I can add white all the way around the side, depending on how I put it together. Now let's do one where we go crossways. Okay, I'm gonna do it with this square here. And you'll notice that we're cutting the wrapping paper part of the present apart versus having individual squares that we put together. So I'm gonna grab one of these pinks, right? I'm gonna need one about like that, and I'm gonna need one that goes across. I like to do the horizontal first, only because when we wrap a present, that's kind of how we do it. So you just pick a line on the horizontal where you want to add that, and we're going to sew this piece in on both sides. Got to do that before we do anything else. Compass quilts, I can't remember your first name. I know we've encountered each other before. The link did not show up on YouTube for that cookie. So maybe could you try again? If not, I will try before the end. But just a reminder, if the link doesn't seem to want to come up, maybe it's a weird YouTube thing. It's Dinner with Julie, and Google Nanaimo Bar Cookies. If not, check out my Instagram and I'll maybe try. Oh, I can't put posts there because of Instagram. Anyways, we'll figure out a way for you to get it. Don't you worry. I'll put it in the show notes. There we go. Because we have been talking about it. All right, so now I want to press. I've got that inserted in there and I want to give it a good press. Again, pressing towards the ribbon on both sides. That way that ribbon nicely pops. Alrighty. So now we have that first one in there, and we've got to make the cut for the cross. So I'm just going to, again, how wide is this? This is 7.5, 8 inches-ish. So I'm going to eyeball halfway. I can square it up to be perfectly in the middle later on. But I am going to use my first piece as a line for cutting so that it's nice and I'm perpendicular to it. You don't have to be. You can do it wonky. Absolutely, you can do it wonky. But the same technique is going to apply whether you do it wonky or straight. So now I'm going to sew this first piece in, and then the important part comes after that. Okay, we got the first piece in, and then you're going to want to press that nicely so it's staying nice and flat. Okay, so it's when we add this next piece in that there's a little bit of an extra technique that matters here. I just want to grab some pins. This is about the only time you ever see me use a pin. You saw it a little bit earlier. It's the same reason why. Now, if I just go and, okay, that the edges line up, I'm going to sew that. I may not have these line up. I could have it end up being kind of wonky like this. If that's your jam, go for it. But I kind of do want them to line up. So rather than worrying about lining up the edges and hoping this meets up, we're going to go for straight to the center and work on lining it up. So I'm going to first eyeball it. I think that's going to work. And I'm going to flip it over to be right sides together. And then I'm going to use a pin. And just like when I was playing with the angles earlier, I'm going to place that pin, or in this case 2, because this is a bit of a longer seam, on what would be that 1/4 inch line where I would have a seam. And then I can open this back up and I have it pretend sewed, and I can see if that lines up or not. And I can see, maybe a little bit harder for you, it's actually a little bit off. I'm shifted a little bit down on this side. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to take these pins and I'm going to shift this up just ever so slightly. Now, it may have been in a position that you were happy with, and that's totally fine. Sometimes you get it right on the first try. Quite often I get it right on the first try. I've gotten quite good at this, but sometimes it's not exactly where I want it to be. That one I'm a little happier with. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew that. And then that finishes up sort of your basic present. Because you can do any variation that you want after this. You could have 2 horizontals and 2 verticals, and using this pin trick still have everything line up. You could have 2 verticals and 1 horizontal, and again, it would all still line up nicely. You get to play around with that. But as I said at the beginning, I strongly recommend making the bow portion first of your block, or even make a few and then worry about making the presents, because you get to play and see what works together. So let's go to the design wall here. Zoom out just a little bit. There we go. And we can play around with some of this. So I used, we take some of these out. I think this one's actually going to look nicely here. Right? I like the way that one looks. And then this one, if I play around and I have some, let's get a strip from over here. Right? Maybe I just go horizontal. Oh, I like that. I would do a horizontal there. I'm going to get my scissors and just trim that. Whoops. A horizontal here. And then maybe a vertical. And the vertical is a different width of fabric. Yeah. I like that one. So which bow do I want with that? Maybe I'm going to put this bow on that present. Right? So I can play around with the combinations that work for me or don't along the way. Right? Maybe that one gets this bow. And maybe I don't even put any ribbon on the present at all. Maybe I get a really small, like, now that I'm looking at this, what if I did this in half, like a quarter that size? Right? And I had just that fun bow on a little present. So you can play around with that, explore some different shapes and sizes along the way. Right, let's do one more. We've got that guy, and let's put that bow on it. Don't worry if your bow portion is too big for it. You can always trim things down. You can add to the whites to the side of the present, or you can trim down the bow portion along the way, or maybe you need to add to it, right? Maybe your bow portion isn't big enough and you've got to add some background, additional background. That's fine too. It's improv. You get wiggle room to kind of play with it however you want. So folks, that is it for me. I'm just going to check the comments one more time. Yeah, the Nanaimo Bar recipe did not come up, so I will put it in the end comments for the video. I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining me today. The sun has literally set while we've been on here. I had a great time. I love doing this for folks. This was a much more in-depth free event for me, and I think it went okay. I'm all for constructive criticism if you've got any. And yeah, looking forward to maybe doing some more of these in the future, but also giving you regular classes along the way. For those of you who are maybe new here or new to me, do know that I am a teacher, quilt teacher for hire. So I am available for online and in-person learning throughout Canada. I can go overseas. I cannot teach in person in the States. I don't have the right visas, but I can do virtual everywhere. And I have a whole list of classes on my website, which is cherylarkison.com. But stay tuned here on YouTube, on Instagram, through my newsletters at cherylarkison.com and quiltersplacation.com. That's where you get the latest on things that are coming. And just to finish up, for those of you that may be interested, who really enjoyed this free tutorial work, I am going to be doing, starting January 10th in 2026, not 10th, 12th, January 12th, 2026, for 30 days, one block a day. So it will not be a 2-hour event. It'll be 15, 20 minutes where we're going to do one fun, straightforward graphic improv, maybe sometimes precision pieced block. So at the end of those 30 days, you will have enough blocks to make a lap size quilt. It is the perfect time to devote to yourself for some play. And that is what I believe is the most important thing that we can do, the best gift we can give ourselves. So after Christmas, if you don't get all the things that you want or the time that you want, you're going to give it to yourself. Come January for 30 days, we will be playing together live on Instagram with the recordings posted here on YouTube as well. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody. I really appreciate the time that you spent with me today, whether you were live or you're watching the recording. Happy holidays to all of you. Get outside, enjoy whatever weather you've got, make the most of it. Enjoy your cookies and your baking and your traditions, and I will see you next time. I'm Cheryl Arkison. Thanks for taking the time to play today. Bye.